This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have an insane story about what Donald Trump is trying to do as it relates to a prison inmate right now. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Okay, so this is truly insane. I mean, even by Donald Trump standards. So Tina Peters is a former election official in Colorado, she was a clerk who was indicted, charged, and went to trial, jury of her peers in a relatively conservative area. She was convicted. She was sentenced to 9 years in prison for her role in compromising a voting system that she oversaw in a failed attempt to manufacture or find voter fraud that didn't exist. Okay, so she is an election denier who is in jail in the state system in Colorado, convicted in the state system. Donald Trump has decided that the Department of Justice needs to somehow spring her from the state court system. Like, he can't issue a pardon, right, because she's convicted under state law. But he is telling his Department of Justice to move heaven and earth to try to find a way to get her out, presumably because she's an election denier. And Donald Trump, the thing he cares most about, look at what he did with the January 6th defendants, is sort of undermining anyone who is convicted of election denialism or crimes related to it. So it's wild, as you say, it's insane, because the Department of Justice, at the same time that they are dismissing lawsuits to protect voters, at the same time that they are abandoning their traditional role in ensuring minority voting rights, they are literally filing pleadings in federal courts in Colorado to try to argue that she is like being wrongfully held in the state court jail system by the system that convicted her in a normal state court proceeding.
Right. So we'll get to the hypocrisy bit in a moment, but just in terms of the actual practicality of what they're trying to do, how much of an input or how influential could the Trump DOJ or Donald Trump himself be? Because this isn't the federal court system, this is the state court system.
Yeah, so look, there's like gradations of crazy here. So I'll tell you where we are in the gradations of crazy. She was found guilty of 3 felony counts of attempt to influence a public servant, 1 felony count of conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation, and then a bunch of misdemeanors. Okay. As I mentioned, she was tried, she was convicted, she was sentenced. When you are sentenced in the state court system anywhere in the country for any crime, you can file what's called a petition for habeas corpus, for a writ of habeas corpus, saying, essentially, I am being held unlawfully. Okay, now, normally petitions for writ of habeas corpus are filed by people on death row as like a last-minute, last-ditch effort. They are typically denied by conservative judges without even paying any attention.
It's people in death row or Republicans suffering from victimhood complex. Those are the 2 tiers of people who apply for the writ of habeas corpus.
Right. These are the petitions that the Supreme Court is saying that the migrants who are potentially going to be flown out of the country should be filing. Yeah. Right. Like, essentially, Your Honor, I'm being wrongfully held. Okay?
Right. Them and MAGA supporters in the fetal position. Those are like the categories right here.
Yeah. So I said this was crazy. So she has a habeas petition pending in federal court in Colorado. Now, these are normally treated as with the back of the hand, because as you might imagine, every inmate in a state court proceeding or in a state prison files a habeas petition. And right. The district courts get flooded with them. They actually have separate dockets to deal with them because they are so ubiquitous. The Department of Justice has filed a statement of interest, which is like literally what the Department of Justice normally does if there is like a high-profile constitutional challenge to a voting law or like a racial gerrymandering claim. The Department of Justice says, hey, we're the Department of Justice, and we have an interest in this proceeding because it involves some very large constitutional claim or something that the Department of Justice ought to be able to weigh in. They have weighed in this habeas petition to say, we, the Department of Justice, have a position we have something to say, Your Honor, in this like routinely filed, never granted kind of habeas thing. They have filed that in federal court in Colorado. So that's where it stands in sort of tier 1 of the crazy. What I'm afraid is that Donald Trump is envisioning something more nefarious. does Pam Bondi try to, I don't know, indict the state of Colorado jail system or something? Like, I can't even imagine what it is he thinks they're going to do. But will he like try to defund the state of Colorado if, over this?
I mean, probably, yeah.
Right. And so that's the kind of craziness that we may ultimately get to. I don't believe that a federal judge is going to find that Tina Peters' habeas petition is in order or is going to be granted. To do so, the judge would have to find that the state of Colorado's court system did not afford fundamental principles of due process. Kind of hard to see. She had a jury trial. She was convicted unanimously. Right. She was sentenced by a state judge. I mean, not the kind of stuff that you would normally. It's not the gulag of El Salvador, right? Hard to argue there's no due process in the Colorado state system, but that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump administration would argue that it's worse because she wears a MAGA hat, and you can't be both a Trump supporter and in prison at the same time. Those things must be mutually exclusive. Look. The fact that the Trump administration has intervened here is one thing, but these judges weren't born yesterday. These judges recognize full well why Donald Trump has a vested interest in interfering in this particular case. They can see the broader environment that Trump is operating in, where the first act that he pulled in office was to release 1,600 convicted felons because they were on his side on January 6th. And so does the fact that the federal government has so little credibility left, does that weigh in on these judges' consideration? Because I'm sure in the past, when the DOJ intervenes in these efforts, that probably had quite a bit of weight behind it. But this isn't the same DOJ. This is a DOJ that is, whose loyalty is only to one man and who's actually very anti-law and order despite what he claims. And so, to the broader question, does the fact that this Trump administration has extinguished so much of its goodwill, has relinquished so much of its credibility, does that weigh into the consideration put forth by these judges?
I think it does, and I think it actually will reinforce the lack of credibility they have in future cases.
Right.
I mean, I'm not an expert in when the last time the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in a habeas petition in a state court involving a state court conviction. I suspect it probably happened like in the Jim Crow South, where the federal government would be like, the local court system is so biased and there was no due process. But I mean, there really is not a straight-faced argument to say that Tina Peters, who was charged in a conservative area of Colorado, although frankly that shouldn't even matter, was convicted by a jury of her peers, was sentenced by a state court judge. I mean, there's no plausible argument here that she did not receive due process, which is what the habeas standard is really about, right? It's to say you have someone who, for example, was plucked off the street, put in a van, sent into a prison, and then threatened with
literally what the Trump administration is doing in other cases.
Like what you do is you go to federal court to say, look, my federal constitutional rights to due process have been violated.
Right, but it's just so wild that they're intervening in this case because they want to prevent the very thing that they're also doing as it relates to all of the illegal deportations of these immigrants. They're saying we couldn't possibly have this Trump supporter engage in the court system with what we don't think was enough due process, while with their right hand, and then their left hand they're saying, get all these people out because they're brown. Just like
without any process.
Without any process, we couldn't possibly do all these trials. There would be millions of trials. We have to send them to a foreign gulag.
Right. So, look, I think that the federal judge who's handling this habeas petition knows exactly what's going on. Do I think it got that habeas petition pulled out of the pile? Yeah, I do. I mean, because the federal government weighed in. And so I'm sure the federal judge is like, whoa, the Department of Justice thinks this is worth reading, so I'm going to read it. Not that they don't read everything, but we're going to pay some attention to it. I don't think it's going to help Tina Peters. I mean, I don't think that it's going to get granted. I think what this does is probably further undermine the credibility of the Department of Justice. I mean, whatever lawyer put his name on this is not going to be, the most credible source, I suspect, when he or she then have to file in another case, on any topic. So I think it is both undermining their credibility here. It's also, I think, going to undermine their credibility in the future.
Right. I mean, that's the part that I think is especially interesting in this is every failed effort that they make themselves a party to diminishes their credibility more when they have to try and use the good name of the DOJ to intervene in these cases in the future. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, what I'm really worried about is that Pam Bondi, who is the Attorney General, so whether she is a good lawyer or not, presumably she has access to some lawyers who know something about the habeas standard. Right. I mean, presumably they have been briefed that this is not going to work. So what I'm worried is that, like I said, they are going to try some harebrained scheme to target, the prosecutors or the jury or the court, the judge, or, these are not people who act rationally, and these are not people above look, they arrested a state court judge in Wisconsin. I'm not saying they're going to do that here, but I do worry that they maybe have some other, more nefarious plan up their sleeves.
Mark, I have to ask, the Trump administration pretends that voter integrity is some sacrosanct principle that they adhere to, and yet we are seeing more and more that the people who have violated this principle happen to be either Trump supporters, Trump officials, or just Republicans more broadly. And so what do you make of the fact that, this is supposed to be their thing, that they're here to protect voter integrity, and yet you have somebody who was prosecuted for voter fraud, and that's the person they're trying to get out?
Yeah, so look, this is the thing. Like, in a normal world, Tina Peters would be exactly the kind of person that a law and order party would be, say, throw the book at, right?
Yeah.
I mean, here is someone who was entrusted with, a position of trust to be involved in helping run elections. This is someone who breached that trust and tried to, essentially tried to tamper with and otherwise, violate Colorado law. And it is someone who was prosecuted and convicted. And so by the time Donald Trump gets into this equation, by the time he's president and he is he's posting on social media, those facts have already been established. Like, that is, she has been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt by a jury of having committed felonies in Colorado. And so a party that was genuinely concerned with law and order, the integrity of elections, would distance from her. Instead, what we have found is that all Donald Trump cares is whose side you're on. And if you're a criminal on his side, he's on your side. If you are innocent on the other side, he is against you. If you're a hero on the other side, he's against you. Right. If you are a villain on his side, he is in favor of you. And it's just that simple. There's no principle here. There's no neutral principle that he believes in. And one of the things that drives me crazy about the legacy media is how much they try to find those neutral principles. I mean, I see it every day. You see it every day just reading the newspaper. They are like trying to divine his theories behind what he posts on social media. They are trying to figure out what the grand scheme is that he has about which businesses he's favoring. I read just recently, they're trying to figure out why he is pro-crypto now. I'm sorry, why is he pro-crypto? He's pro-crypto because people are using it to put money in his pocket. Right. It's not any more complicated than that. Yeah. And so I read the legacy media sometimes and I think, you guys don't get, there's nothing more complicated. Tina Peters, he thinks, is on his side. Marc Elias, he thinks, is on someone else's side. Right. Therefore, Tina Peters is a hero and Marc Elias is a thug, I think he called me.
Well, look, Mark, I think your diagnosis of what the legacy media is doing is absolutely spot on. And it also underscores the work that you've been doing on YouTube. You now have a YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. Highly recommend for everybody watching right now. Please help grow the left of center progressive media ecosystem. Please subscribe to Mark's YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. So go ahead, hit the subscribe button and watch a few videos and make sure that you get it into your algorithm so that more people beyond just you can see it. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.